With the Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart showcase all wrapped up, let's break down what we've seen and analyze what Ratchet, Clank, and Rivet are in store for on June 11th. Now, I'm sure I'll miss one or two things here or there, so at the end, if that's the case, make sure to add your own notes in the comments down below, and if you're new here, make sure to subscribe, as I've been breaking down the entire Ratchet franchise game by game, interviewing former developers and telling each game's unique story in preparation for Rift Apart. I think you'll really like those if you check them out after you're done here. Alright, first things first, we open up this trailer by seeing Rivet tinkering with an infobot, with a slightly new design based somewhat on the PS4 game's version. As everybody's noticed already, Clank seems to have lost an arm when he was separated from Ratchet in the earlier trailers, and considering that Rivet's got a cybernetic arm herself, he's probably in good company of someone who could help him out a little bit. It's worth noting that it's Clank's right arm that's missing, just like Rivet's, which could be a story beat, but also could be a little callback to the fact that Clank's left arm was broken at the end of the first game, and Ratchet fixed that one up. Also, it's really weird hearing Clank yell all the time now. I'm cool with it, it's just a bit different from the more collected version of him that we've usually seen in every game up until now. As this gigantic creature destroys the wall to Rivet's little secret base here, the pilot says, "Missing infobot located, initiating retrieval," and he uses a tractor beam to pull the infobot on board, but instead, Clank's the one that's pulled away from Rivet, and we see now that his legs may also be damaged, as they appear to be stuck in their usual positions when Clank's in his backpack form rather than swinging out like, legs. Saving Clank, I'm guessing, is the focus of this next mission after this, but instead we get a hard cut to what looks to be the mission's end, as Rivet is about to hammer the pilot square in its tentacle eyes. Speaking of those eyes, I've been very curious as to what species these nefarious grunts are meant to be in this game. Their mechs seem to be a similar design to the Drophids from Ratchet & Clank Future Tools of Destruction, but they've got long, stringy tentacle eyes instead of just being fish like those Drophids, as if these creatures were actually the Tyrannoids from the PS2's Up Your Arsenal. They may very well be, and probably are, just an entirely new species as well, but it's interesting seeing the different inspirations that their designs have drawn from throughout this series. And while we're talking about all of those different inspirations, good timing, as developer Marcus Smith walks us through this showcase, we see a vertical pan down through some sort of city slums. It's hard to say which planet this is outright, but you would think at first glance that it might be the Bogon Galaxy based on the Megacorp logos prominently displayed on the screens in the background. Smith mentions that this city is called Nefarious City, which doesn't really help us out at all in narrowing down the planet, or the galaxy really, but it does give us more insight into this alternate dimension, one where Nefarious has conquered the entire universe. And whatever this dimension is, we know that Rivet is wanted, with a very high price on her head. It's also worth noting that Smith mentions that this is a standalone adventure, which likely confirms the assumption by many fans, myself included, that this game would act as a very soft reboot to the franchise like the first PS3 game Tools of Destruction did before it. Several developers over the years have referred to Ratchet & Clank in the same way that one refers to different incarnations of James Bond, that as the years pass, a new generation of developers heads up these projects, and they bring their own inspirations and ideas to the table while carving out their own place in this expanding franchise. This means that this game will be a perfect place for newcomers, but that there are definitely a ton of secrets for us to dig into and appreciate as fans. And one thing that I really appreciate is that these next few moments do an excellent job of setting a very different atmosphere from just about any other location in the series, as we've never really gotten to see the bottom of the game's sprawling cities. These dingy alleyways give us a great look into the new lighting work that's gone into Rift Apart, no doubt utilizing the techniques tested before in Insomniac's Spider-Man games on the PS5. The demo seems to me like it's showcasing the visual mode of this game, with 4K graphics locked at 30 frames per second and also featuring ray tracing. We already know that there's also a 60 frames per second option for the game at 1080p, and if Spider-Man is any indication, we're almost certainly looking at a 4K 60 FPS option that just removes ray tracing. So, no matter how you want to play this game, whether you prefer that high frame rate for this high-octane action, or you want to see this game in all of its visual glory, there's gonna be some sort of option for you. As Ratchet enters the Nefarious City Bazaar, bypassing what seems to be a lot of either alternate paths or alternate viewpoints or something, there's a lot of different places we don't really get to go to in this city during this demo, he runs into Mrs. Zircon, who's now the weapons vendor in this game rather than being part of a weapon herself. As Marcus Smith says, this alternate dimension means that not every character is going to be in the same position that longtime players are used to. Mrs. Zircon's vendor style also represents a callback to some cut content from the original Ratchet & Clank game back on PS2, where the vendor would open up for you in real time rather than opening a separate menu. This put too much of a strain on the PS2 hardware though, so it was cut, but the PS3 games used a slightly altered version of the same concept so that they could have the vendor there in the actual world. What we see here seems to be the fully realized idea that Insomniac had in mind 20 years ago. And behind her we can see some holograms of our arsenal choices, including what looks like the Buzzblades among a few others. During this conversation, Mrs. Zircon confuses Ratchet for Rivet, which would imply that Rivet is the last Lombax in this dimension just as Ratchet is in his. She also mentions the Resistance, an anti-nefarious rebel group for whom I'm assuming Rivet acts as the leader. Ratchet and Rivet cross paths for an ever so brief moment before she escapes in her ship with Clank on her back. Mrs. Zircon, or as Ratchet calls her,
Secret Agent Zircon.
This is so exciting!
Great reference by the way, tells Ratchet to head to Club Nefarious deeper in the city to find a ship that can escape the planet. And I've just gotta say, the animation work in these cutscenes is just incredible. There's so much personality here in every character. You can really tell that the sales success of both the PS4 Ratchet game and Spider-Man after it have earned Insomniac some more rope when it comes to budget. It seems to me that Nefarious City is going to be a much more exploration-focused area than we may be used to with Ratchet & Clank, with multiple densely packed walkways, corners to peer down, that's almost certainly a grind rail right there, and surely loads of secrets to find. This could indicate that Ratchet's gameplay, as well as possibly Rivet's, may be generally more freeform, still linear of course, but with some, let's say, Mario Odyssey-styled micro-hubs to explore it. For now though, we'll just have to wait and see, because in this demo, Ratchet just jumps up to this overhang and smashes a new Raritanium crate before walking right past a stack of regular crates. He's never gonna afford weapons acting like that. We also see, as we saw earlier and in previous trailers, that Ratchet's hover boots make their full return, which leaves the Clankless Ratchet with the mobility options he would have had with Clank anyway, so that kinda works out. There's a laser gate blocking the path directly ahead, which might indicate that Ratchet's here in Nefarious City for a little while, or that may just be how Ratchet returns to the main bazaar from the club. Also, a very tiny thing here, and I could be mistaken, but one of the robotic bouncers sounds like it's voiced by either David Eddings, the original voice of the Borderlands series Claptrap, or somebody else doing a really bang-on impression of that character. If that is him, wow, I caught that, nice catch, but it's also a great little reference considering that Borderlands has had a reference or two to Ratchet in the past. By the way, if you want to see every Ratchet reference in other games, I have a video featuring AntDude covering just that. The demo jumps ahead a bit as Ratchet enters Club Nefarious, but it's worth noting that Rivet so far is the only other organic lifeform that we've seen in this demo in Nefarious City. Considering that Nefarious has always had a vendetta against so-called squishies, there's a good chance Emperor Nefarious in this universe is in the process of committing universe-wide genocide, which, by the way, was the name of my prog rock band in high school. This definitely seems to be the case in Nefarious City at least, even if not across the whole dimension, as here we see a holographic, dead tree in part of the slums. Not even a holograph of a living tree with foliage, just a dead tree. Now there are a couple vines hanging down on the sides of buildings, but knowing Nefarious, I wouldn't be surprised if those are actually robot vines somehow. Dude just hates life, and I think we can all relate to that. After the jump, we see Ratchet's two new abilities in action, a wall run and an air dash. The air dash is also showcased later on during combat, and it sounds like it's going to act as a proper dodge move, giving us invincibility frames while dashing. During the first of these wall run sections, we see a spray-painted icon on the wall, what looks vaguely like a Lombax head with ears and the works, and this might be the logo for the Resistance that we've heard about. It's hard to say right now as we jump ahead yet again now, this time to combat. A voice that sounds eerily like Skid McMarx narrates this intro to the nefarious day spa. I'm assuming this voice is the voice of the Phantom that Ratchet was seeking out, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that the Phantom is revealed as Skid when we play for ourselves, and that's probably why they jumped ahead. This combat section shows us a bunch of what we've already seen before in the previous trailers, including the rift tethers that Ratchet can pull himself into to find higher ground or throw enemies off of his trail. This is just a hunch, but I expect that encounters are going to be a bit more harrowing this time around than in previous games, with more aggressive enemies actively hunting for you, forcing you to use these rift tethers and the dodge as much as you can. We also see the burst pistol and the enforcer shotgun that we've seen in the previous showcase, with Smith explaining the DualSense trigger effects to each. If you pull the trigger one shot at a time with the burst pistol, for example, you'll fire an accurate shot one by one, but if you hold it down, it'll act as an auto pistol with less accuracy but dealing a little bit more damage overall. The Enforcer likewise allows a half press or a full press of the R2 button to fire one shot out, or an even more devastating double shot, with the trigger actively resisting your press as we've seen across other PS5 games by this point. With the Enforcer specifically, we also see a live ammo count lit up on the weapon itself. If you half press, you'll get 2 shots before needing to reload, as seen when the top light here turns red. But if you hold the trigger all the way down, you'll fire off both at once, both lights will turn red, and you'll have to wait a moment before firing again. Along with the rift tethers and the dodge, there's definitely a lot more risk-reward at play here than ever before in this franchise. The demo jumps ahead yet again from here into a boss fight encounter against a nefarious Juggernaut, and during this fight we also see the D-pad Super Quick Select in action. We know already that the regular Quick Select is an option as well, likely still mounted to the triangle button, but it's really good to see the instant D-pad version back too. During this fight, Ratchet and the Juggernaut are pulled through a dimensional rift in real time to a whole different planet. Smith notes that the entire planet is being loaded here, not just a separate arena area, and this comment makes me wonder if these are designed in a linear fashion, or if it's random which planets you might jump to during some fights. If the entire planet is being loaded, can we hypothetically teleport to another part of the same planet? And can 2 different players have completely different experiences with this and other fights in the game? Another very small series staple returns during this part of the fight, as we see the other living creature alternate between attacking Ratchet and the Juggernaut, depending on who's hit that creature most recently. 3-way combat encounters have existed in this franchise since the very first game, so it's an awesome little touch to see that return. In the background of this fight, and I'm assuming on most levels throughout the game, we can see dimensional rifts opening and closing, an indicator that whatever our universe's Nefarious has done with the Dimensionator, it's almost certainly going to lead to some sort of singularity between the 2 dimensions during the final boss fight, or at some other point in the game. That's just inevitable. From here, we jump to Rivet gameplay on the planet Sargasso, first featured in the PS3's Tools of Destruction. Rivet has 10 more health than Ratchet at this point in the game, but interestingly has her burst pistol at the same level. It appears that Ratchet and Rivet will in fact share weapons, and their purchases will overlap between each. Thanks, Mrs. Zircon. Whether these weapons actually share experience or we'll have to upgrade them individually per character, it's hard to say right now, but I'm leaning towards the former. As Rivet scans the distance and showcases the incredible amount of detail both in the worlds and the number of creatures and objects moving around in the background and foreground, Marcus Smith's voiceover cuts her off, but we can hear a little bit of what she's saying. At least what I can make out is, great, another Seeker ship, and then I lose her for a bit because Marcus speaks up, but after that I can barely make out what sounds like her saying something about that Seeker ship being this far out of Mylon. Mylon is the final planet in Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, Nefarious's base in that game, so it might make sense that Nefarious City is on that planet if Nefarious had won in this universe in Up Your Arsenal. However, that's all the way in another galaxy from Sargasso, so I don't know that it would make a ton of sense. I may just be hearing things here. If you heard something different, let me know. Once Rivet turns back around to another weapons vendor, in the background we can see that after 19 years, the cut Revolverator weapon from Ratchet & Clank 1 may finally have been implemented. This melee weapon was designed to grab enemies and spin them around on the drill head, but it caused a ton of visual bugs and ended up being scrapped. As is always the case with Ratchet & Clank though, Insomniac doesn't let ideas go to waste. This is just the most recent of many, many weapons from the early days that were saved for a day down the road when they would be possible to actually implement on newer, more advanced hardware. We don't actually see this weapon in the shop when Rivet opens it up though, so it may just be a reference for folks like me that'll notice it, but odds are if it's there in that storefront in the background, it's just not being shown in this demo, and it'll be around in the game later on. In this shop, we see a number of new weapons, including Mr. Fungi and the Ricochet, which we didn't get to see used during the rest of the demo showcase. And we see the Negatron Collider, a weapon that fires a laser that pierces through enemies. The Ricochet isn't purchasable yet for Rivet, which is a bit unique for this series. Usually weapons are only shown in the vendors the moment that you can actually buy them. I wonder if perhaps one of the Lombaxes can buy certain weapons and the other can't use them until that happens. Or it may just be the game telling you to start saving up, either way. As we already knew, Raritanium upgrades are making their return, a series staple at this point, but we actually don't get to see the upgrade trees for the weapons just yet. I'm assuming this demo has a few upgrades in place already for the burst pistol based on its weird ammo count of 158. It probably starts at 150, and the person playing the demo bought a couple ammo upgrades in that upgrade shop. If, however, you can purchase upgrades on that small a scale, only 8 more ammo total, that might be an indication that upgrades are more freeform than they've been in the past in the Ratchet & Clank franchise. This would mean that we might need a lot more Raritanium than we usually have had before, and that might check out since we know that this game's ESRB rating mentions in-app purchases. I'm guessing that means we can pay real money for extra Raritanium, and before you get all upset, this has already happened once before in 2013's smartphone companion game Before the Nexus, where you could purchase bolts with real money, and like in that game, I'm anticipating that this will be completely unnecessary here for anybody that actually wants to play the game. Still, if Raritanium has been rebalanced a bit with a more fleshed out upgrade system, there's always a chance that it's been made intentionally rarer for the sake of an extra buck. I would greatly doubt it, but I wouldn't be surprised if a big buy more Raritanium button is there on that upgrade screen, and that would probably be why they didn't show it today to avoid controversy if so. We also get a new look at the Topiary Sprinkler, the game's turret weapon that stuns enemies in place as it turns them into plants, as well as the Shatter Bomb, this game's thrown bomb weapon. It's worth noting at this point that the more cinematic optional camera angle that first appeared in Tools of Destruction returns here in Rift Apart, although like in that game, it's still totally optional here. We see Ratchet and Rivet use the burst pistol from both this over-the-shoulder and the usual behind-the-back perspectives, and other weapons seem to be that same way. Thankfully, you do seem to move much faster if you choose to use that over-the-shoulder look now, where in Tools of Destruction it slowed you down a bit too much to be really all that useful in many fights. After this fight, we're introduced to Rift Apart's pocket dimensions, small sub-dimensions that act as their own micro-levels. It sounds like there are going to be a good number of these optional bonus areas to find secrets, but it's also clear that at least a few of these pocket dimensions will be mandatory for progression, like this one here obviously. After grabbing this Speedle creature to ride across Sargasso's acid swamps in a sequence that reminded me of Spyro's Charge Chase sections way back on the PS1, Rivet and Clank return from that pocket dimension. We can see that for this particular section, the game gates you off with red barriers so that you follow the objective, but in general, it does sound like riding Speedles will be a key exploration tactic for going through this massive open world of Sargasso, once the game wants you to, that is. Rivet and Clank after this finally arrive at their destination, Sargasso's Gelatonium plant, a familiar location to those that played Tools of Destruction. I'm really curious if Gelatonium itself will also return, as it was one of the wider use gadgets in the series up until this point, despite being featured only in that one game. If a good number of these levels really are just massive sandboxes like they seem to be, having the bouncy Gelatonium platforms at your fingertips in some areas would make for some awesome puzzles. Before we can worry about that though, Rivet has to take down the Goons for Less that are assaulting the plant. Goons for Less are the very same Thugs for Less that we know and love from Ratchet & Clank Going Commando, as well as Into the Nexus, but here they've been renamed. I had figured this was because the Goons were this dimension's alternate version of the Thugs, but it sounds like they actually do come from Ratchet & Clank's dimension, so they just went through a name change after Into the Nexus apparently. The Goons also seem to have grabbed the robot dog technology that was used for some enemies in Ratchet 1, as these guard dogs make their return to the series as well. This is where the main gameplay demo ends, but the sizzle reel at the very end of the state of play gives us a lot more to be excited about. Smith specifically says that the bits we've seen up to this point are early gameplay clips, which is pretty common for the Ratchet series, so that's kind of expected. But then the trailer shows us a wide open area that Ratchet's exploring with his hover boots, featuring a bunch of new animations to boot, as well as a gargantuan creature right over Ratchet's head. I really hope we climb and fight that thing Shadow of the Colossus style. We see new Clank gameplay described as dimensional puzzles, which based on just this 5 seconds, I'm going to guess are similar to Super Mario Galaxy's Shadow Mario sections, where a bunch of alternate dimension Clank clones are following his movements one-to-one, and the player must avoid letting those other Clanks touch him while they travel to the destination. We're shown glitch challenges, some kind of micro-sized minigame featuring a little spider tank attacking enemies. Neat. There are arena challenges as we'd expect, as well as combat mid-flight as we see Rivet flying on top of a pterodactyl creature and firing her weapons at enemy assailants. This'll be the first time we have flight combat where we get to use our regular weapons instead of ship weapons, so that's just awesome, and also gives me a bit of Panzer Dragoon vibes, which is also kind of awesome. We see another pocket dimension, this one an optional one featuring a Big Al blimp from the parade at the start of the game, and there are fully customizable armor sets, which may very well bring back the armor effects that were only featured in the PSP's Ratchet & Clank Size Matters. It's hard to say whether combining different pieces of armor will give you different effects, but on the right side of the screen we see a completed list of collection bonuses, which grant you more bolts, raritanium, or experience, increase your wrench damage, or reduce damage from specific types of enemies. These may just be awarded by picking up each armor set or by completing other objectives rather than by combining gear, which would mean that the armor itself is just kind of cosmetic. These armor sets are really gorgeous though, and super inspired, and the Captain Starshield armor is a direct callback to the fallen hero featured briefly in Ratchet Deadlocked. That is a deep cut if I've ever seen one. And as we already knew, there's a photo mode as well, using just about the one-to-one photo mode user interface featured in the Spider-Man games. This'll make the Rift Apart review thumbnail so much easier to make, so I'm here for that. Lastly, there's a full customization suite for the game's user interface, so that you can change specific text color for keywords, the color of your aiming arc or enemy attacks, there's aim and flight assist, pretty much any accessibility option you could imagine a player wanting or needing, it's here, and that is awesome. They're keeping this under wraps for now, but I would not be surprised if, like The Last of Us Part 2, this game is completely playable and beatable to a player that's completely legally blind. The more people that can play Ratchet & Clank, the better, so I applaud this. And with a few other planets shown off at the end of the sizzle reel, a few of which will look very familiar to Ratchet fans, like what seems to be a Volard outpost maybe on planet Torin 4, that's the end of our gameplay look here. But what does this all mean when put together? It's clear to me at least that this is going to be the most fleshed out Ratchet project we have ever seen. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this clocks in as the longest game in the series, even before all of the side content that we've seen already. In fact, I'm pretty confident that this is the first Ratchet & Clank game ever to have more than 12 or 13 months of active production. Every other Ratchet game has only had a year of full development at most. And obviously this all shows here, even while we've got a ton of questions left for June. We still haven't even seen the real Emperor Nefarious, only our Dimensions version sitting in his throne. How will a more successful, more evil Nefarious take that kind of encroachment? We know that the last time we saw our Nefarious before this game, he was starting to ever so slightly warm up to Ratchet, Clank, and Quirk, so is there a chance we'll see Nefarious turn face against the more evil version from Rivet's dimension? And more importantly, is this Too Nefarious story going to be messy? Is there going to be a consequence to Ratchet and Rivet eventually meeting, assuming that they are in fact parallel versions of one another? Will the Dimensionator's destruction and the chaos that's coming from it lead to the return of all of the Lombaxes, or perhaps will some pocket dimensions allow Insomniac to address previously castaway villains like Tachyon or the comic-exclusive Artemis Zog? Where is Captain Quirk? Despite having so much more that we now know about Rift Apart, we actually know incredibly little about this story or where it's gonna go, and that's really exciting, if maybe a little bit worrying at times too. That's about all I've got for now, but what little bits did you catch that maybe I missed? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to make the wait before you can play Rift Apart a little bit more bearable, I've got 2 feature-length retrospectives covering Ratchet & Clank 1 and its sequel Going Commando, featuring deep insight into the game's development thanks to interviews with developers. They're a lot of fun, and I've got retrospectives for Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal and beyond on the way very soon, celebrating this wonderful series game by game up until the release of Rift Apart. Make sure you check those videos out, subscribe if you haven't already and you want to. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you didn't like the video, you don't have to. That's fine, I understand. And as always, until next time, stay golden.